Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's 10 best dinosaurs. But just before we get into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like, as it really does help out my channel. In at number 10 is the Spino or Spinosaurus, whichever way that you really want to call it. Now, the Spino is definitely a great dinosaur. What would you expect? It's got massive teeth, huge claws, and it really is great for all things combat. And actually, I'm pretty sure this thing does even more damage than a Rex. And actually, all of that damage does really help this creature out in terms of bosses. As compared to the Rex, this thing has significantly less health, but its higher damage does allow it to still last through all of those boss fights. Also, compared to the Rex, the Spino has significantly better mobility, which is why personally, for travelling and just general combat around the map, I do prefer a Spino from a Rex, as these things can turn on the spot. They are also really great swimmers, which the Rex simply is not, and also on top of all of that, these things are significantly faster than the Rex, and they have a lot more stamina, a significant amount really. And also with Spinos, I tend to not get stuck on everything, but with Rexes, they always seem to get stuck on the smallest stones and just the littlest of things littered around the Ark map, whereas the Spino just is able to traverse all of that with relative ease. Also, in terms of the Spino's additional abilities, it can stand up on its hind legs, allowing it to deal even more damage. This isn't great when you're running around, but for dealing all of that damage quickly, it is absolutely insane. And also, on top of all of that, these things have the hydration buff like the Shadowmane, which means when they're in contact with water or in the water itself, these things will deal an immense amount of damage buff. In at number 9 is the Therizinosaurus. Now, this is definitely one of Ark's and just overall one of the most iconic dinosaurs because of its really long claws, and that is why this thing gets the name of Freddy Krueger sometimes in Ark, but I tend to call this thing the tickle chicken. I don't know where chicken comes into it, but you know, the tickly fingers. That's kind of my thoughts on that. Either way, in terms of the Thery's use in Ark, apart from its just amazing model design, is the fact that this thing is really great for harvesting any kind of berries. It's great for gathering fiber, which is a really big one, because you always need fiber in Ark. You can never have enough fiber, but it is also pretty reasonable at gathering wood and thatch as well. This thing is just simply packed for harvesting, and its saddle is unlocked at level 69, which is pretty nice. Also, for the dragon boss fight on the island, the Thery is the creature that is going to do that job to the highest ability. Yes, you could use a Rex, but the dragon's fire ability really is not kind to carnivores in any way at all, so really try your best to use Therys in that fight. And for other bosses, they're great as well, as they deal very reasonable amounts of damage and they have a good health stat. The only downside is you need sweet vegetable cake to heal them up quickly. In at number 8 is the Allosaurus. Now, to me, this is essentially a Rex with high mobility, but it is nerfed somewhat slightly. The Allosaurus is a great tame like the Carcharodontosaurus in that kind of stage of the game, where you feel like you want something better than a raptor, but you can't quite qualify up to get something like a Rex or a Spino. The Allosaurus is a great middle creature. It will really give you all of the damage that a Rex deals, except you can get it much earlier on. Also, in terms of taming this thing, it's not that bad either if you have a very simple trap, and you can pretty much tame 3 in one go, as they will always come in packs, with the pack alpha having that signature orange glow. But if you did just want to tame one Allosaurus instead of taming the whole pack, you can always just tame the alpha. You just need to lead the others away first, or you will not be able to knock out the alpha, as when the alpha has that buff, you will not be able to knock it out. But once tamed, the Allosaurus is a great harvester of meat, And also on top of that, it has a bleed ability as well, which comes in real handy. And also the main thing why I say this is a creature for those kind of mid-tier Ark players is its saddle is unlocked in the 40s or 50s, which is a significantly lower level than the Rex being unlocked into the mid-70s, which really gives this creature a big advantage. Also, compared to the Rex, this thing does attack a lot faster as well, which can come in real handy. And again, like the Spinosaurus, this thing has great mobility. Not quite as good as the Spino, as the Allo isn't really going to stack up in water, but on land this thing is probably even faster than the Spino. Sadly, this doesn't really have any additional buffs apart from that bleed ability, but I'm really not going to be complaining at this stage of the game when I have a creature of this immense power. Especially if you have a pack of these things, they can be really great tames for those mid-tier stages. In at number 7 is the Megalosaurus. Now again, like the Allo, this thing is a great mid-game Ark tame, and it is an extremely useful one, especially on Operation. The only thing is, you can only really use this thing at night, as in the daytime this thing is just sleepy as, and you're not going to get any real use out of this thing. But in the nighttime, this thing is an absolute beast with a wealth of abilities, which really makes this thing a great Ark dinosaur, and is one that you should definitely have. And maybe don't put this thing up against Microraptors, but overall I would say it did do a really good job of handling this one. As you can see here, it has the Microraptor in its mouth, and it will hold onto it until the Microraptor is completely dead. There is not really a timer for this, it will just keep holding onto it until that creature is completely dead. And also these things are relatively good alpha killers, except I really couldn't kill this alpha as it decided to kill itself by running off of a cliff. Goodbye, Alpha Raptor. Either way, the Megalosaurus is really an essential carnivore tame, and it really is not a difficult one. In terms of the island, if you want to find this thing, these will spawn in caves. Yes, caves aren't the most easiest place to get into, but still, unlike something like the Arthropleura, these are not passive tames, so they are actually one of the kinder tames that you will tame in a cave. And really, they aren't that bad if you do come prepared, and they are 100% worth it, as they deal really nice amounts of damage. They're extremely mobile, and also their size is really convenient. In a PvP scenario, you can easily hide one of these things away, and out in the night, you could maybe do a raid with one of these things, and in the day, just hide them somewhere. In at number 6 is the Rex. Now, I have talked badly about the Rex for the past of this video, but really in terms of everything else apart from its mobility and things like that, this is an insanely great dinosaur that I think everyone should have, as it is an extremely balanced creature, and all of those other carnivores, their health really does not stack up to what the Rex has. Yes, some of them may deal more damage and attack faster and have better mobility, but that is not what the Rex is about. The Rex for me is purely just a boss creature, as in that scenario it will do better than any other carnivores or creatures that I have already mentioned in this list. Apart from the Theri in the dragon boss fight, the Theri is just the way to go for that, no questions asked. And also, yes, unlike the Spino, the Rex is not great in water either, but again, that is not what it is used for. This is a great big hunking beast of a carnivore that is mainly just used for bosses. And also for the Master Controller on Genesis Part 1, you really can't pick any other creature apart from the Rex, as that boss fight is very long, and the Rex is going to actually have the health to go through that boss fight. And sometimes Rexes will even die as they do not have enough health to keep going. Other carnivores would just simply die too early on, and that boss fight would not be possible at all. So yes, I have talked about the Rex somewhat badly in this video, but it is an extremely useful carnivore that everyone at some point should tame. In at number 5 is the Giga. Now obviously you would expect the Giga to be on this list, and this was the first creature in Ark that had this immense power. And because of that immense power, Wildcard combated this by giving this thing a rage meter, something that the carcharodontosaurus doesn't have, as Ark is a very different game now, where creatures of that immense power aren't too uncommon anymore. The Giga, when it came out in 2016 though, was by far one of the most powerful creatures in the game, and it simply could not be matched. And it was so cool, and it was a sign of great progress if you did actually have one of these things. And if you remember Squid's old Ark series, he named this thing Tiny Tim, with Ash obviously, and that is a very, very suiting name for this thing, as it completely goes against its nature. But in terms of the Giganotosaurus now, what's good about it and what is bad about it? I always like to start with the good news, and the Giga is still an insanely powerful creature, which is really great for doing bosses on Extinction. Sadly, you can't use it on other maps as it is considered too powerful and will not go into boss arenas. But sadly, this thing's stamina is absolutely atrocious, and no matter how much you level its stamina up, you are still going to be facing a lot of bad stamina. And also on top of that, its mobility isn't great either. This thing really has a not great turning circle at all, and it does move relatively slowly. But its immense power, great health stat, and all of that really do make this thing a great combat carnivore. In at number 4 is the uteranus. Now, I will always come back to the uteranus in Ark, as this is one of the most essential carnivores in the game, no questions asked. And yes, this may not be the creature that is fighting the bosses in Ark, but it does play an absolutely essential role in the boss arena. The uteranus is the thing which drives all of those creatures to deal the most amount of damage possible, and when you pair it with a Daedon, you have a perfect recipe for defeating bosses and always being successful every single time. And that is mainly because the uteranus has two main roars, one significantly more popular than the other. The first is the fear roar, which will debuff the enemy and cause them to lose control if a rider is on them when there is a tamed creature. But also there is the courage roar as well, which will buff your creatures and again debuff the enemy. Now, in terms of that courage roar, that is what you are going to use for the boss fights. You're not really going to use the fear roar for that, as the creatures of the size of a boss will not really be affected by the fear roar, but the courage roar will still buff your creatures and allow them to deal even more damage to that boss. In terms of the fear roar though, it is great in PvP if someone's trying to raid your base on something like a Pteranodon. You can simply fear roar them and away they go, they can't raid you. In at number 3 is the baryonyx. Now, the baryonyx is by far one of my favourite creatures in Ark, and definitely a great dinosaur. If fantasy creatures were involved in this list, it may be a bit lower, but this is a dinosaurs list, and it really does deserve to be in the top 3. The baryonyx has so much use, and unlike the Megalosaurus, of a carnivore of this size, it can actually stay and be useful throughout the whole day. Yes, the Megalosaurus is overall a better carnivore in terms of damage and health, but the baryonyx really does add up in terms of all of its other uses. Compared to the Megalosaurus, this thing is a really great size, which makes this thing great for doing any kinds of cave, apart from the ones where you literally need to crouch and no creature will fit in there at all. But with cryopods, these things are even more accessible in caves now, and it is really a great shout to tame one if you are struggling with all of those caves and getting through all of those enemies. Also, the baryonyx does have a wealth of other abilities as well, and it is extremely mobile. The baryonyx is a very fast creature with great swimming abilities as well, and also a special ability underwater, which you may have just seen. when underwater, if you do press C, this thing will have a spin attack, which doesn't necessarily do any damage, but it will stun creatures up to the size of a megalodon. And as you'll see here, these megalodons are completely stunned and then become motionless. Sadly, this doesn't work on creatures larger than the megalodon, but it is still an insanely useful ability which no other creature shares. The only real downside about the baryonyx is this thing will only eat fish meat, and sometimes that can be a little hard to come by. In at number 2 is the carcharodontosaurus. Now the Giga would have been in this spot, but when this thing came out 8 months ago, or however long it was, I'm pretty sure it's about that, it might be a bit less than that, this thing really did hit the scene. This thing is essentially the Giga, but everything that was wrong with the Giga is now fixed. The carcharodontosaurus is a very mobile, big carnivore, and its stamina stat doesn't run out every 20 seconds. And actually, yes, its stamina may not be the best from the start, but if you do level up its stamina a bit, or get a stamina mutation when breeding, it will become really great, and you'll never really have to worry about this thing's stamina ever again. Also, in terms of all of its other stats, it has a wealth of uses as well, especially considering this thing does not have a rage meter, so now that is something that you do not have to worry about. And yes, that kind of makes the Giga's rage meter obsolete now, so again, this creature is making the Giga even more useless. But that doesn't mean the Giga is not a useful creature, it definitely is, and it definitely does still deserve a place for you to tame it. Also, in terms of taming for the carcharodontosaurus, this thing is much more difficult than the Giga. Yes, it doesn't require any tranks, but you still need a lot of resources and also a lot of times on your hands, as it is essentially a bit of a weird passive tame. But either way, this thing is still a really great carnivore. In at number 1 is the Deinonychus. Now you may not expect a small carnivore like this to be in the number 1 spot, but I really think it deserves to be, as you can get this creature really early on in the game, and it is one of the most OP creatures. This can literally be your first tame on Valguero, and when you get a pack of these things and start breeding them, you have yourself a creature of absolute insanity, which will shred through bosses like ease, as it can latch onto the side of large creatures and literally rip them to shreds with that bleed ability. One Deinonychus can easily rip through any large creature on the map, and when you have a pack of 10 or 20 of these things, you can absolutely shred through bosses. Yes, the Shadowmane is a great shout as well, but that is not a dinosaur, that is a fantasy creature. And either way, I would still go for the Deinonychus, as these things have a wealth of other abilities as well. Like the Deinonychus is completely immune to fall damage, which may not seem like a lot, but considering this thing can somewhat glide through the air, it is an extremely useful ability, and it's just one less thing that you do not have to worry about. Also, in terms of their mobility, these things are really great climbers. Unlike the rock drake, they do not just simply walk up the walls, they do jump, but this actually makes it a lot more fun for me, as you're just doing insane parkour around the map. Yes, this may not be useful for bosses, but their bleed ability, allowing to be inflicted on bosses, is really OP, and these are by far the best dinosaur Ark has. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I hope you enjoyed. Comment your top 10 best carnivores in the comments down below, as I'd really like to hear your thoughts, and I will see you all later. Bye.